Hey fans, did you know that Dash is the only digital auction platform built specifically for professional sports teams and their fan bases? It is also your place to score your favorite hockey team's most authentic memorabilia and game day experiences. Dash powers the auctions for your favorite AHL, ECHL, SPHL, NAHL, and USHL hockey clubs, plus many more across sports. Get in on the bidding now by texting DASH to 66866 or visit thesinbin.net and click on the word auctions in the upper right corner to find out the latest hockey auctions. Dash, making sports bidding so much easier in the digital age. This episode of the In the Corners podcast is sponsored by Sporfy, the sports video platform that allows you to instantly capture, replay, and share your favorite game highlights, all without having to film. For more information, visit sporfy.com or download the mobile app from the Google Play Store or the App Store.
Bringing you the only weekly podcast dedicated to the ECHL. This is In the Corners podcast. Now your host, CC Hockley.
Well, good evening from the mile-high city of Denver, Colorado. This is the In the Corners podcast for Monday, May 4th, 2020. And may the 4th be with all you fellow Star Wars fans as well. Welcome to episode 84 of The Good Ship In the Corners. The ECHL and SPHL seasons have unfortunately been canceled for over a month now. And rumor has it that the AHL season is going to be following suit after a May 8th meeting that's going to be coming up this Friday. League-wide conference call is going to be occurring then, and rumor has it that they are going to be nixing the 2019-20 season after that call. So we'll touch on that more later. Tonight, in a pre-recorded segment from yesterday, my guest has been unofficially a part of the Sin Bin for 2 seasons now. He has been creating his own analytic data on the AHL, ECHL, and SPHL for close to 2 years, and he has been employed by Statstrack as an analytics tracker for almost a year now. Sean O'Brien joins the show for the first time right now. Enjoy. Well, we are very fortunate to have analytics guru Sean O'Brien, the SOB that you want to kind of be like. And Sean coming to us from Pennsylvania, formerly of Macon, Georgia, covering the Macon Mayhem, and so much more down there in the land of peaches. So, Sean, how are you doing up there in Pennsylvania?
I'm doing well. It's been quite an adventure getting back here in the middle of a global pandemic. But I'm happy to be a little bit closer to family and some old friends and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked, over the past few weeks about you making the move, and of course, nobody could have predicted, what kind of circumstances that befell us. I mean, mid-March and on, in regards to just the COVID-19 crisis and all of that. So, I mean, I'm guessing that the move itself wasn't, it was probably a little bit of a crapshoot, a little bit more difficult than, just moving during regular time or BC before Corona.
Oh, it was, 0 out of 10. Would not recommend. It was, it was an absolute nightmare. And we knew that it was going to be, but I think we didn't really understand the scope of how ridiculous it was going to be. Because we ended up moving all of our stuff into a rental truck, and getting the rental truck was so bonkers. Like, somewhere Franz Kafka is rolling in his grave smiling at the sheer chaos of it. But putting all of that stuff on the rental truck and having to do the dance of do we really need to drag this 900 miles? Or is this something that's just nah, that could go to a friend or the garbage or eBay or whatever. And then basically getting in the truck, driving 900 miles. We did all of that in about 48 hours, of which I slept maybe 2 hours, which was at a truck stop in, I want to say, North Carolina, in the bed of in the cab area of the rental truck. using a cooler as a pillow. So not exactly the best 2 hours of sleep I've ever gotten. But
Not ideal.
yeah,
No.
very not ideal. All of that in a short period of time, in which like we were under a lot of stress, a lot of just sleeplessness, a lot of caffeine. So it was very not enjoyable. But I think we're now at a place where, should life ever go back to something that resembles normal, that we're going to be in a place that's closer to our family, closer to some of the other things that like feel a little more comfortable for us. I did enjoy it living in Georgia, but I think this works just a little bit better and fits a little bit better for our lives at this point.
Well, and I think, yeah, I mean, personally, of course, you've got family up there. And, like my father always taught me, I mean, simple 3-word advice that he echoed throughout his lifetime towards me: family is important. And so to be closer to family and everything, I definitely don't, I definitely get that. I don't want to downplay that at all. But I guess coming from a hockey standpoint, you go from an SPHL market down there in Macon. And now, being in Pennsylvania, I mean, again, you and I have talked about being closer to some AHL teams and even some ECHL teams. I mean, are you looking forward to being, kind of more plugged in to the higher levels of minor league hockey there in Pennsylvania?
Oh, absolutely. I went to Hershey Bears games when I was a kid. I was actually at the last game the Hershey Bears ever played in Hershey Park Arena. I played in Hershey
Okay.
Park Arena as a kid, growing up. So I have an old Tim Tukey jersey, because he actually coached me a little bit when I was a kid, with the
Oh,
Junior
wow.
Bears. So I'm definitely a long time like fan of the Bears, and it's going to be good to get back and be a little bit closer to them. The Reading Royals are also really close by. So are the Lehigh Valley Phantoms. There's a lot that's kind of put me right back into being able to get to some of these games live. Whereas in Macon, I went to a lot of Mayhem games, but never quite made it out to a Gladiators game, unfortunately. Because it was just they always overlapped with other stuff that I had to do. And but I'm looking forward to getting back to seeing some AHL games live in person and some ECHL games live in person.
Oh yeah, and I tell you what, I can definitely echo that sentiment because moving from Boise, Idaho to Denver, Colorado, you go to a sole ECHL market where the closest team is the Utah Grizzlies. That's a good 5 or 6 hour jaunt down I-84, down into Salt Lake City there, into West Valley City, the suburb there where the Grizzlies play. I go from that to being 45-minute drive from Loveland, where the Colorado Eagles play in the AHL, and the drive to downtown, or I could take the light rail, which is mass transit is kind of a revelation for somebody who lived in Idaho for 19 years of his life, and was used to a bus system that only operated 6 days a week, and not even on
Oh,
Sundays. Yeah, uh, obviously with that metro area growing, that's another a burden that they have to deal with, but I digress. But coming here, and of course you've got the Avalanche. I mean, I drive by every day. I'm in the North Denver area and I work in South Denver for my day job. Every day when I drive down I-25, I've got Mile High Stadium on my right, and I've got the Pepsi Center on my left when I drive by and exit off of State Highway 85 there to go to work. And it's just it's so crazy to be able to not only be that close to an AHL market, but also to be close again to some, well, obviously some NHL action as well. And now with you being, close to Hershey, close to Lehigh Valley, and close to Reading, my geography skills are failing me right now, especially because I'm not looking at a map. But what NHL markets are you close to now?
I mean, we're not far from the Flyers. Like if we, took a couple-hour drive, we could be in Philly and go see a Flyers game. Same thing with
Okay.
Pittsburgh. We're pretty much in the like not dead center of the state, but pretty close to it. So, I mean, even if we wanted to go see like some of the AHL or ECHL teams in the New York area or Wheeling or something like that, it's not that far of a drive. It wouldn't be something where I'd say like we could go every game or something like that. But should there be a particularly interesting game there, and I was able to go, we could definitely make it work.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I asked that question, is because in the East there, everything, it really doesn't matter. You've got NHL, you've got AHL, you've got ECHL, and everything is just so darn close out there. Like I've had conversations with, people like Carrie Roberts, who was our correspondent in Glens Falls, who covers the Adirondack Thunder, Kristen Bassett, our photographer that used to cover the Manchester Monarchs and now covers the Maine Mariners, because it's just so, I don't want to say so close, but I mean, a good 2 hour, 3 hour drive from where it's at, Portland, Maine, over to Manchester, New Hampshire. I mean, coming out west here, like I said, Idaho and Utah, good 5 or 6 hour drive away. And, even though it's still kind of a, like I said, you've got the Eagles, you've got the Avalanche, but you don't really have like a super, again, like if I were to drive out to Utah from the Denver area, it would take a bit of time. I think maybe 7 or 8 hours, but like everything is just so, just in proximity, just so much closer on the East Coast and even in the Midwest than it is out here in the West. And so it's like to have that opportunity, is just, it's huge, and going from, you can probably relate. I mean, like you said, Macon, you could make it out to a Glads game if you wanted to, but I mean, I'm guessing Macon, there just wasn't a whole lot of, of the minor league hockey action that you now have access to once sports start up again, of course, there in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, for the most part. But what was interesting about it is, though, you would see a lot more distinct fan bases where, like in Pennsylvania, it's such a hodgepodge of Flyers and Penguins and like minor league teams, as well as like there's a pretty good following for college hockey up in the area too. So it's you get a lot more of like that kind of just like mix of fan bases where it's in the Georgia area it's you're a Macon Mayhem fan if you're anywhere near that uh, area code. And like hockey, same thing with the Gladiators. Like you don't have that much competition for fandom in that area. If they're hockey fans, they're fans of that team, or they're carrying fandom from somewhere else. Like that's the I would say the biggest difference I've seen so far.
Gotcha. Yeah, I can see that. Just some more defined, you know, just some more defined lines of fandom. Yeah, I get what you're saying there. So let's get to your main focus and your main passion. I mean, it's pretty obvious from your social media accounts that whether on Instagram or Twitter, even on Facebook, I've noticed you sharing just a lot about analytics, and
Mhm.
you've been unofficially affiliated with the Sinbin. I mean, you've shared statistics with our former SPHL editor Mike Campos, and how you were just kind of bouncing off SPHL analytics, and now you're diving more into the ECHL and the AHL, and definitely you're diversifying. I mean, in the past year and a half, 2 years that I've kind of noticed you and picking up steam and everything on your social accounts. Man, analytics. I mean, what got you into it, and when and where did you start really doing it?
So I used to be in what feels like a past life at this point. I was a scientist. I studied social psychology. That's what my master's degree is in. But I've always
Okay.
been a scientist, even when I was younger. Like when I would play video games and stuff, I would take notes and like test theories and like try and see if I could find ways to improve my play and stuff. Whether it was like mapping out Zelda or taking notes on Super Smash Brothers characters. Like I, I've I have always been a nerd. And like when analytics kind of came to hockey, I was actually late to that realization. I would say hockey analytics became pretty big around 2011, 2012, and started gaining traction. With I think it was 2013 was the summer of analytics, where teams hired like all of the good public work guys for analytics in the NHL.
Hmm.
But I really didn't start picking up analytics until about 2016, 17. And that's when I started learning more about like why Corsi is important, why zone entries are worth tracking, and became more familiar with the analytics that people used and referenced, how they work, and that kind of thing. And like being a scientist and having that kind of background in stats, and being, as I've always said, a nerd, it came very, I guess, naturally to me because it very easily clicked with the knowledge I had and why this should matter and stuff like that. But from there, when I moved to Macon in 2018, I saw the SPHL and realized that like no one talks about analytics at that level or in the ECHL or the AHL. So I decided that I wanted to, see if I could find some way to maybe make a contribution to that and be the analytics guy for minor league hockey, because no one else was going to do it. So I might as well, see if I could give it a shot. And then I
Sure.
discovered the point shares model, which is pretty much the basis of most of what my work does. I realized that I could put the publicly available data that the SPHL, ECHL, and AHL put out there, make that work with the point shares model, and then produce a lot of the graphs that you see. And then I started seeing like, okay, what is the furthest that I can go with just this limited amount of public data? And pretty much ever since then, I've been trying to figure out ways in which I can do more and do it well.
Okay. I noticed that you, I mean, like I mentioned in the introduction, that of course you haven't heard because it'll be pre-recorded at the beginning of this, but
That's fine.
you started working for Statstrack, and you've been doing that for almost a year's time, coming up in July. How did you get connected with them?
That's actually kind of a funny story. So
Okay.
I actually connected with them because I commented on their Instagram page. They were putting
Huh.
out content on Instagram, and I just happened to come across it. And like they were looking for people to work as game trackers. Where basically what we do is we sit and watch the video of the game live, and we're tracking the events through the app live in real time, and then in intermissions and stuff, we'll send reports to coaches. And I mean, those reports can be anything and everything that they want, whether it's shots on goal, shot location, whether that's where the puck went on net or where the shot was from. We track both of those, as well as zone entries, how much time the puck spent in each zone, hits, turnovers, all of that. And that's all linked to our web portal, which then they can go pull the clips of those events that we tagged right away. So it allows them, data in real time, as well as connects it to a video clip that they could go and see. Where if they see, oh, we're letting up zone entries on the left side a bunch, what do those look like? They can quickly go and look at that to make adjustments. But yeah, I hooked up with them through Instagram, which I feel like it's weird that I got a hockey analytics job through Instagram, but I guess, it's 2020. This is the way things work. Uh,
Sure.
but that's been a lot of fun. I've gotten to see hockey at so many different levels. I've gotten to watch a lot more women's hockey than I ever have before, because that's a lot of the clients that we have are like women's collegiate programs, as well as
Oh,
like a lot of
cool.
junior. I've also learned that there are a lot of junior leagues that have teams with just absolutely hilarious names. Uh, that's been a lot of fun too.
Yeah, I mean, throughout minor league sports, I would say, especially in minor league baseball, you've got the really, really outlandish names sometimes in regards to some of their teams. But okay, break it down as simply as you can. I know that I put out an article about the Colorado Eagles recently with a lot of help from you and a lot of help from Mac Moore in my education of analytics and point shares and a number of other topics out there. But the best that you can, for the common person and for the layman in hockey, what are some of the basic measuring factors in analytics?
So everything is always going to come back to goals and scoring chances. If what you're doing isn't preventing goals or scoring goals or moving the needle on what gets that done, then on the ice, it's really not worthwhile. Everything in analytics that's important comes back to that at its core. So, um, and a lot of it is more like we don't usually use goals as the measure. We use shots as the measure for a pretty simple reason is that like in a game, there are only about 5 goals, 7 goals total. Whereas if you look at shots, there's lots of shots.
Right.
And then if you look at shot attempts, there's even more of those. So it's easier to get a better picture with data if you look at things like shot attempts and shots instead of directly goals. Also, because
Mhm.
you can't have goals without shots, you can't have shots without shot attempts. So
Right.
it's an indirect kind of way, but it's used simply because there's just a bigger pool of data with looking at shot attempts. Where if you wanted the same kind of degree of certainty using goals, you'd need way more games than you would just looking at shot attempts. Um, but it all boils down to that. Take something like zone entries, for example. If dumping and chasing were just as effective in generating offense and generating scoring chances as carrying the puck into the zone, then the big effort to create controlled zone entries would be a waste. The fact is that
Mhm.
controlled zone entries lead to more scoring chances by a wide margin. So we should care about that. Now, does that mean you
Right.
should never dump and chase as a team? Well, no, it doesn't. It just means that, like tequila, you should use it responsibly.
Yes, yes, you should.
And that's
So
also something
go ahead.
that
Yeah.
you see a lot with with face-offs. Face-offs, generally you would be like, oh, winning face-offs is super important. But when you look at how face-off wins move the needle on goals and shot attempts and things like that, it doesn't really pan out. Like, yes, if you lost every face-off, that's probably going to have a bad outlook on your team's chances that night. But realistically, that's never the case. Like, you're still probably, even just by showing up and trying, going to win 30% of the face-offs. Now, that's not great, but face-offs are not something that analytics has found really moves the needle that much when it comes to scoring chances, shots, goals, the important things.
Right. And I think, it's so important. And it's something that I learned, pretty early on when I was starting to dive into analytics a little bit myself, is that there is a total difference between, there's a total difference between shots and shot attempts, because shots, they actually get on goal, like the goaltender actually saves them, when shot attempts is just somebody that's putting the puck on net, and whether it hits the post or it actually misses the net, then that there's definitely a differentiation there, which I think is important. It's important not to just look at shots on goal, because that doesn't paint the whole picture. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here because this, but
Oh yeah,
the difference between the two, I think, is it's a simple thing, but it's a very important thing.
and I mean, to also be clear, like shot attempt still doesn't paint the whole picture. Nothing does or ever really perfectly will, except
Well,
maybe
sure, yeah,
fingers crossed we ever get player tracking data. A man can dream. But
right.
for the time being, like nothing is ever going to perfectly give you an example of a game, but or exactly what happened. But it gives you, as I like to think of it, it makes looking for a needle in the haystack. Analytics can significantly reduce the amount of hay you have to look through to find your needles, because you can look at the numbers and see, okay, there's a problem here. Let's go look at that video to try and pair what I'm seeing with my eyes with what the numbers are finding. Those are when you find the best solutions.
Yeah, to put the hypotheticals and or the hypotheticals and the tangibles, I guess. Would that be a fair assessment, to combine the two, and just that paints at least the best picture we can with analytics right now?
Oh yeah, but I think a lot of people seem to think that like it's always one versus the other, and that always makes me sad, because it's like you
Hmm.
have something where if you're a coach trying to go through video to find out why this is going wrong. I mean, you're going to spend hours watching video that probably has nothing to offer you. Whereas if you use analytics to try and find those spots, you can, like I said, reduce the amount of hay you're looking for. It also is a good thing too of like our eyes lie to us. Like we see things a certain way. We're influenced by biases of like, but I really like that player, so I'm going to, maybe not accurately assess how good they are in the defensive zone. Whereas like analytics, numbers are numbers. They don't have favorite players. So that's another way that you can kind of use analytics to maybe help curb some bias that you would have in eye test evaluations, as well as I mean, I'm open to being wrong all the time. It's something that I think as a coach, like you have to be open to the idea that what you see is not always what's exactly going on. And the same thing of, sometimes the numbers that like there are limits to how accurate anything can be measured. So it's not to say that, oh, you should always trust the numbers and your eyes should just confirm that. That's not true either. It's the best is to use a blend and make decisions from there.
Something I love that you always post on Twitter when you have a new graph and everything is you like to include the gif from Monty Python with the little servant to King Arthur and everything, and they're all like Camelot, 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 and he's all over grumbling in the corner. Well, it's only a model.
It's only a model. Yeah.
It's only a model, and that's the thing. Like when you post it, I'm sure you get a number of detractors that are like, well, what the hell, man? You've got you're telling me this person sucks or this person's point shares isn't good, and you're kind of heading it off at the pass with that gif, and you're saying, well, listen, man, these are just numbers and figures that I've computed, and it's only a model, and you're like, don't take it like super seriously.
That's the other thing too, is I like, even though I have a favorite team and I have least favorite teams and stuff like that, like none of that filters into my work because it's all run by numbers. Like
right.
I don't have a place where I could just put my thumb on the scale and be like, oh, I think Macon deserves to be a little better in the model. So we're just, nope, they can't do that. Like it doesn't work behind the scenes that way at all. But also too, to realize, like, are there some players that come up in the point share system that I feel like the model overvalues or undervalues? Absolutely. And that's something where, again, like the idea is to be less wrong. Like it's not going to be perfectly right about every player that you put in, but the idea is to be less wrong. And that, right. I mean, especially too, there are a lot of times where you look at players who look good on the ice, and even if they're not scoring or whatever, somehow the model manages to capture, like, no, they're still not terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. It's another tool, and it's another measuring stick. So, and I love how you worded that. It's just to become less wrong. It's not to become perfectly right. That is what hockey analytics is supposed to be. And I think especially in the past, 10 or so years, teams and organizations and affiliation trees are definitely, reaping the benefits from that. In example, or case in point, Toronto Maple Leafs, Toronto Marlies, Newfoundland Growlers, just a perfect example of how analytics from the top down can just benefit, an affiliation tree like that. So speaking of NHL, AHL, ECHL, and of course SPHL, what is your favorite league to cover and why?
So that's a tough one. They definitely all have their positives and negatives. I would say the AHL, highest quality, and they give me these shot charts after each game in the box scores. Now, I haven't figured out how to pull the data from that yet, but I'm working on it. I also feel like they're the closest to giving up that sweet time on ice data that isn't public for reasons.
Yeah.
But
whatever reason that may be, yeah.
Yeah. The ECHL by far, though, has the most fun social media. Whoever runs the Twitter for these teams, they deserve a raise. The banter between like Indy and Fort Wayne is amazing. Toledo, also a very fun follow on Twitter. And a lot of the teams just, they seem like they don't have the like corporate professionalism that the AHL teams do most of the time. And they have a little bit more of a budget to get creative with it than some of the SPHL teams. So they find this like very niche area where like they get to do way more fun stuff and not worry about like, oh, is this super professional? No, not necessarily, but it's way more fun.
Yeah.
And the SPHL at the same time, like they actually give me information of who's out on the IR and who's on the active roster that the AHL and ECHL don't because reasons. And like because they're such a smaller league, it gives me a smaller data set, and it's easier to write code for projects to see like, oh, well, let's test this and see if this could work out or this could be better. A lot of that starts at the SPHL level when I am experimenting, just because it's a smaller file and it's easier to kind of maneuver around. But at the end of it, though, I feel like it's the AHL. But it's really close. But I would say it's the AHL because the fans, the journalists, the hockey ops personnel seem to be a little more interested in my work. They contact me with questions, which I enjoy talking about. So perhaps that biases me towards them a little more. But it seems like it's a group that interacts with me a little more. So I'm going to go with them.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, when you have a a league fan base, I should say, that's a little more engaged and a little
Mhm.
more inquisitive in
Mhm.
certain terms, it's definitely, I can see why you definitely want to pick the AHL in that regard. So
Mhm.
to kind of finish up our talk about analytics, and we'll conclude with another side project that you did, which of course I'm all about hypotheticals, so we'll get into
Oh
that
yeah.
here in a second. But
Mhm.
how are you continuing? I mean, of course, if you don't grow, you become stagnant. I've been doing this minor league hockey thing for 3 years now, and I totally get it. Moving from the ECHL to the AHL, doing this podcast for a year and a half, and willing to open up to new ways of doing things. How are you continuing to stretch your analytics acumen, I guess, if I can put it that way?
Well, I mean, I'm always trying to find new ways to make lemonade, so to speak, with what's publicly available from minor
Sure.
hockey data. I've been working on a call-up project to assess, like, when an SPHL player is called up to the coast, what could their production look like at that next level? Same thing with a coast guy getting called up to the A. I've been working on that, like, here and there for a while now, and I have an idea of how it's supposed to look at the end, and it's just trying to get the coding right and stuff like that. And it's also a huge project that requires merging a bunch of data sets that aren't meant to go together. So
Right.
it's challenging, and I'm also working on learning how to do more coding in the language I use. It's a program called R. To be
Mm-hmm.
able to better use the data that I have, because I have lots of ideas for projects of like, oh, let's see what happens if like what changes can you see to like teams winning percentages based on distance traveled to the game that night? Like,
Hmm.
is every 100 miles you go, does that knock off half a percentage point of your team's expected win rates? Like, that's a project that I've been kind of interested in. Because that could also help inform you when you're submitting dates for the schedule to try and get, clip off a couple of miles here and there can help you squeeze out a few more games. I'm always trying to communicate to any coach that will listen that they need to pull the goalie earlier, like way earlier. Like, whatever time you
Like
think it
for
is, add 3 minutes to that, and that's when you should pull.
like pull the goalie for an empty net.
Oh yeah.
Oh wow.
Most coaches throughout hockey, you'll see the goalie get yanked with like a minute and a half left, whatever. It's like, no,
Yeah.
like 4 minutes. That's when you should be pulling.
That's
Um,
like Patrick Waugh, Colorado Avalanche coaching status right there. Like he was pulling it at like 4 or 5 minutes left in the third, and people were losing their minds. They're like,
oh, I
"What is
know.
happening?" And he'd
Oh, I
win
know.
games because of it.
Yeah. See, that's I think the reason that a lot of coaches don't want to do it is because they don't want to have to explain afterward that, like, why did you lose this game 7-3 that you could have lost 4-3? Like, they don't want to look stupid. I pulled my goalie with 5 minutes left, and I just kept pulling him at that point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we got 4 empty net goals scored on us, and now we look dumb. Nobody
Right.
wants to have to explain that to the owner, the GM, the players, stuff like that. But it's, hey, if you could squeeze out two more points in the standings at the end of the season because you pulled your goalie earlier, you should probably be doing that.
Yeah, I mean that's it's a huge benefit, and like I said, I mean when Patrick Waugh did it when he was coaching the Avalanche, 5-6 years ago, it feels like an eternity ago now. But yeah, I mean the hockey community was like, what is he doing? And
Yeah.
it was working, and
And it's funny too because Patrick Waugh was like the most anti-analytics. When you asked him about it, he was like, "Oh, that's nonsense." But then when you heard about like how his team should improve or some of the stuff he's doing, it's like, no, that's what analytics is telling us.
right.
But like, it seemed that he just didn't want to hear that. But I mean, he definitely gets a lot of credit for just having the courage to be like, oh yeah, we're gonna do something like this, and not being afraid of like the bad outcomes that can come from that. And I think more coaches should take kind of those steps of like, let's be aggressive and go for it instead of losing games 4-3.
Yeah. Yep. And it's just there's a lot of ingrained, I'm sure there's a lot of ingrained habits, and this is the way how we do things. And it was in baseball, and then the Oakland A's in the early 2000s, and the Moneyball deal happened, and
Yeah.
and of course it's bleeding over into, I would say it's even kind of bleeding over into the NBA a little bit. Obviously not so let me try that again. Not so statistically based, but I mean, you look at time management, just the time and just the player,
Load management.
load management. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, what's the term for it? There it is.
Yep.
So yeah, you look at that in the NBA and everything and how people are doing that. And yeah, it's amazing how, the people that are going with the growth of just numbers and new ways of doing things and kind of embracing that. Sometimes it pans out and sometimes it's like the Wildcat formation, which works in college football, but they tried it in the mid to late 2000s and it didn't, it kind of worked. And, you had Tim Tebow with the Denver Broncos that kind of, could make it work in some instances, but by and large it didn't. But that's the thing about hockey analytics and stats. It's a little different. Go ahead.
Well, the other thing too is like it worked in the beginning because coaches didn't have time to adapt to it. They didn't understand
Right.
why it was being so successful. And then when they, eventually got to get a better look at it and scheme around it, then they figured out they made the next advancement and shut it down. And the Wildcat didn't evolve from there to continue to work, so to speak. So there's some of that to it as well. But in hockey data, it's still like it seems like hockey has always been the slowest sport to evolve when it comes to just game tactics or whatever. Because even stuff like load management that the NBA is using very successfully is slowly starting to sneak its way into hockey. Where like you remember the days when Martin Brodeur would start 70 games out of an 82 game season. Like
Right?
that,
Yeah.
that's never going to happen again. And that's probably good. If you look at the goaltenders who are in the Stanley Cup finals each year, like I think the last one that started more than 60 games in a season was probably like 5, 6, 7 years ago at this point, because they're seeing that, you get a goalie who's playing every other night in the playoffs, like they're gassed after having to play 70 games in the regular season. They're tired and they're not as effective. Whereas like look at Marc-Andre Fleury, who only played 48 games in the regular season, the year the Golden Knights, stormed to the Cup finals. He's fresh.
Right.
It's a lot easier when you just don't have the mileage of the season on you. And that's something that analytics is showing. Like, you should have a more dependable backup so that when you go into the playoffs and you're just riding one guy the whole time, he still has some gas left at the end of the season.
Well, and the Montreal Canadiens were totally guilty of that. I think, Carey Price had played 50 games before the NHL season, was put on hold, and it's just like, what are you doing? Like, this is your star goaltender, and maybe, you didn't develop your goaltending depth chart as well as you could have or should have, but like Carey Price isn't exactly, a 22-year-old, rookie goaltender that has, just unlimited amounts of energy as they often do. But I think another example, and that you're probably a little more familiar with, well, of course you're familiar with Carey Price in the NHL, but
Yeah.
I guess in proximity, Sean Bernard, I mean, he was down in Atlanta a couple seasons ago, and I think it was him, and I looked at his numbers, and just like he was playing a lot of games for the Gladiators, and I'm just like, man, they are riding this guy. And of course, I think he had a real hot streak where he was goaltender of the month in like January or December, and his goals against average was really low, and his save percentage was really high, But I get riding a hot goaltender, I get that, but when you're riding him to the point where the wheels are going to fall off come playoff time, and you don't have any backup goaltender, or you haven't given the backup goaltender enough reps to be a viable threat in goal, then it's just like you're okay. Well, we're gonna ride our hot goaltender into the playoffs, and then oh crap, the wheels fell off. Oh, what are we gonna do? It's
Yeah, and you kind of see the same thing with when you look at like the PDO of teams. For those playing along at home, PDO is used as a proxy for puck luck. Basically, you want a number for your PDO that's just the number is just shooting percentage plus save percentage, typically at even strength. But you want to end that up to be around 100 because that's a number that is sustainable over the long term. But you see teams with PDOs that are 103, 104 going into the postseason, and then it's like, oh, first round sweep, here we go. It's just you've gotten lucky. You've gotten good luck to a certain point, but that's not going to carry you. And that's why a lot of times too, when I'll pick like my brackets for the NHL Cup playoffs or anything like that, I'll often have, whoever the PDO leaders in the league were that are almost assuredly a number 1 or number 2 seed. Those are the ones I never pick to win at the end because they almost never make it there because their luck just runs out.
Yeah. Like I mentioned in that Eagles article I wrote, Mac Moore, he has written a number of analytics articles for the Sin Bin, and he pointed out, he's like, hey, the Cincinnati Cyclones, I think their PDO was just super high, like 115, 116 or something like that. And of course, that's just like you said, it's not sustainable, and it wasn't. They got, I think, upset in the second round. I think Toledo was the one to knock them out that season, and they ended up going to the Kelly Cup final against. Go ahead, yeah.
It's funny too because you'll see stuff like that happen at the NHL levels too. Like what's nice about the NHL level data is that you can do way more cool things. Like I remember I went back and I looked at the PDO of the Marchand Bergeron Pasta line from the Stanley Cup Finals last season, just to see what their on ice PDO was because they have that data at the NHL, and their PDO in the Stanley Cup Finals, small sample size and everything, was 79.
Whoa.
Yeah,
79?
79. Again, for those playing at home, you want to be at 100, and if you're a point or two above or below, that's where you start to be like, oh, they've gotten really lucky or really unlucky. That was the low, and this is Marchand, Bergeron, and Pasternak, like a line that crushed people in the regular season and through much of the playoffs, and then they couldn't buy good luck in the finals.
Yeah, and of course you run into a hot goaltender like Jordan Binnington. I mean, that's gonna lower your PDO as well. But yeah,
79.
That's brutal, man. 79. Hey, I know this is kind of a. Before we go into our concluding topic, I know this is kind of a bit of a sidebar, but I noticed when I was talking about you expanding your repertoire, as it were. You called the ECHL the coast, and I find it hilarious that there are people out there. I hear you chuckling a little bit. You know where I'm going with this, but I find it hilarious, especially, in 2003, this directly affected me living in Idaho in 2003 when the East Coast Hockey League, basically granted a bunch of former West Coast Hockey League franchises. They granted them teams in the ECHL, and that's what it became. It was orphan initialism, I think is what it's called, when you have, or orphan acronym or something like that. But ECHL no longer stood for anything, and it hasn't for 17 years. And yet you have players that still call it the coast. I've had interviews with, former players of the Steelheads and otherwise, and now it's like, it's so funny. We're 17 years removed from the official East Coast Hockey League, and yet, and it being just the ECHL, and yet people are still calling it the coast. And it's like, I'm just so surprised that they never actually underwent like a branding change, especially since ECHL, of course, East Coast Hockey League, you've got teams. When that occurred, you had teams in California, you had the Alaska Aces, you had, you had the Idaho coming in, and you had the Las Vegas Wranglers for a time. It's like you had a coast to coast hockey league, and yet you still remained with ECHL. And unfortunately, I think that ship has sailed, and they're probably just going to stick with ECHL until the cows come home. But it's just fascinating to me. That's kind of a, just like I said, it directly affected me, and just kind of an interesting note I wanted to bring up.
Oh yeah, but I always think it's funny. It kind of goes with the saying of, you could take the boy out of the neighborhood, but you can't take the neighborhood out of the boy. Like, you could not call it the East Coast Hockey League anymore, but it's just part of the zeitgeist. It will be the coast. Or, if the American Hockey League suddenly doesn't, rebrands to be the, NIHL or something like that, like, it'll still be the A. Like, yeah, I can't imagine that will ever change.
No. And with the AHL, there's really no reason to. It's just American Hockey League. It's pretty straightforward. Same with like the International Hockey League. That was kind of a, AAA kind of running, like a coexisting AAA league that lasted for a long time, and then they went under. It's so fascinating. You have just this league that ECHL stands for nothing. It stands for ECHL. And it's like, well, okay then. But
I mean, but
Anyway,
still, like you could rebrand the A just because there are Canadian franchises. It's not strictly Americans anymore, but they're probably never going to do that.
well, in American, you could say, well, North American, so that kind of
Yeah,
includes Canada. So,
yeah,
yeah, there you go. All right. Well, last but definitely not least, and I'm super excited. And so are you when you brought this to me. You're like, hey, listen, I've done this side project. It's not analytics based, but and like I said, I am all for hypotheticals. I mean, I have done a number of different articles where I've talked about, you know, gosh, a couple summers ago, I tackled, hey, these are some I think it was 5 or 6 cities that in Western United States that could be ECHL markets. I broke down why they would be, why they wouldn't be, and my final verdict on them. And then I also did another one recently where I talked about when Vegas was interested in buying an AHL franchise to relocate to Henderson, Nevada, a suburb of Las Vegas. And
Mhm.
I'm like, okay, well, here's the teams that, I start off with the Chicago Wolves, and I'm like, listen, whatever you've heard, this is not going to happen. Chicago has been an independently run franchise for over 25 years across the IHL and the AHL. That's not going to happen. And so, and I kind of tackled, okay, maybe Springfield, because they've kind of got a conglomeration of owners. Maybe the Rockford Ice Hogs, because they're actually owned by the city of Rockford, and that's kind of an anomaly in any sports league. And then, I talked about all the franchises that were independently owned, not owned by their NHL parent clubs, and was like, okay, well, this club wouldn't work. San Antonio won't work because the Spurs Sports Entertainment, they've got a pretty solid ownership group. And lo and behold, I had to eat some crow and say, wow, didn't see that one coming. San Antonio sells to Vegas, and it gets shipped off to Henderson come 2020-21 when that season rolls around, whatever that may be.
Yep.
So anyway, long-winded statement. I love hypotheticals. I love diving into it. Love seeing what could be. Even if it's not, even if it probably won't happen, it's fun to play around and everything like that. So with all of that said, without further ado, I wanted to introduce something that Sean wrote. And he shared it between, it was kind of just a pet side project. He shared it between me and him. It is minor league affiliate changes based on proximity, and how in the current setup of minor league teams, and he even took some liberties to relocate and grant expansion franchises to certain markets and past markets of minor league teams. And he worked it out from the NHL to the AHL to the ECHL level. Granted, you've only got 26 ECHL teams currently, so it's not going to balance out perfectly. But by Jove, I tell you, Sean did a hell of a job, and I'll do my best to post this to I'll do my best to post this to the sin bin, because you put a lot of work into it, and you put a lot of just doing the best you could. Some of it wouldn't work out like you told me, but you did your damnedest to really kind of line it up the best you could with as much just with as geographically close as possible between NHL, AHL, and ECHL clubs.
And I definitely took some like liberties. Like it's not a strictly based on mileage, because if I did that, like then yes, technically the Syracuse Crunch are like 20 miles closer to Pittsburgh than the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins, but
Right.
that doesn't make any sense. Like that would just be silly. And there are a couple of cases like that where it's like, yes, there was one that is technically a little bit closer, but it's like this is changing for the sake of change, because then I have to reassign that affiliate to someone else, and like it. There were a couple drafts of this where like I had Atlanta becoming an AHL market, and then I'm like, no, because if I do that, I'm basically just saying that this market is like I'm arbitrarily choosing one team to then be left out. So there have been a lot of edits through it, and it's for the most part a couple of affiliates stood still, like the Anaheim Ducks and San Diego Gulls,
Right.
the Avs entire organization, the Colorado Avalanche with the Eagles and the Grizzlies, that stood.
Right.
The Islanders with the Sound Tigers and Railers, that stood. Same with the Flyers and Penguins organizations. All of those stood intact. But a lot of the other ones, there's a lot of movement. I forget the number. I forget the number now. Who I have changed affiliates, and a couple that I demoted from the AHL. And I did some of that like kind of logic based on like size of actual market. Some of it, if like they seem to struggle with attendance, and I feel like they would be better as an ECHL market. I don't need it as any slights to those fans or like those organizations. I mean, a lot of them are teams I'm a big fan of. Some of the stuff they do. Utica is one. I had them become an ECHL market. And I love Utica. I actually, now that I have an actual address they can ship to, I'm going to be getting one of the Puck the Virus shirts that they sell. But
Nice. Very nice.
I had them drop to the ECHL, and they are part of the New Jersey Devils and Syracuse Crunch organization. But some of the other big ones that I moved, I promoted the Florida Everblades to the AHL. They're the Panthers affiliate, and then the Orlando Solar Bears are their ECHL club. I sent Jacksonville to the AHL as well. They are the Tampa Bay Lightning's affiliate. The South Carolina Stingrays are their ECHL affiliate. And I went back and forth with, should it be South Carolina? Should it be Atlanta? And it's just basically, it was always going to be, well, it could be this one or it could be that one. And it didn't really make too much of a difference. So I left it with South Carolina. Hershey changes their ECHL affiliate from South Carolina. They pick up Norfolk, which is a little bit closer to them. I have Rapid City changing affiliates. They're going to be with the Manitoba Moose and the Winnipeg Jets. What are some of the other bigger changes? Oh, some of the expansions that I put.
Yeah, let's look into that.
So there was also some thoughts about why those were the places I went. Obviously, Las Vegas is expanding, and they're taking one. They're going to Henderson. I also gave them an ECHL team in Reno because it seems like when researching other West Coast possibilities for the ECHL, that Reno has been a target of theirs for years. It fits in very well with kind of the footprint that I set out there. So I decided to, give them Reno because I have, divine powers in this fantasy world.
In this project. Absolutely. Yep. Yeah.
So the two that I moved teams for, I had the Edmonton Oilers get a team in Regina for their AHL franchise. Regina's been a market there that's definitely been able to support a WHL team, I believe it is, the St. Pat's, for quite a while. It's geographically pretty close to Edmonton. I also thought too of that could also, it's about the same distance to Calgary. But then I realized that in terms of cultivating a fan base, there are a lot of guys who are on that roster that are from Regina that could be on the AHL team. And I thought that would probably help grow the fan base there of having, the local kids on the team, as well as it seemed like from what I could gather online that it was more of an Edmonton Oilers town than a Calgary Flames town. I left
same province. It makes sense.
Yeah. With Calgary, I then gave them the Bakersfield franchise. I thought about switching that up, but no other market in that that was geographically closer really made sense besides Regina, and they went with Edmonton. The other expansion one I gave is Vancouver now has an affiliate in Abbotsford, where the Heat used to be. And in researching why the Heat didn't seem to track well, it's they had trouble winning fans over for a Calgary system. And I looked up where Abbotsford is, and it's just outside of Vancouver. And I'm like, oh, you think?
It's in British Columbia, of course. Yeah.
It's basically a suburb of Vancouver. And then I read that Vancouver tried to buy the Heat and then make that their affiliate, but couldn't get the details worked out. So like I said, divine powers, I made it work out for them. So their affiliate is no longer across the country, which they seem to be making it work. And I know Vancouver is a franchise that has a lot of money. So if that's what they want to keep doing, okay. But I think having their AHL team in Abbotsford would be a bigger benefit to them, being able to have eyes on their players much more frequently, especially reading reports and interviews with player development people throughout the NHL and AHL. They all are oh yeah, having our affiliate an hour away makes a huge difference. We love it, which especially makes the fact that the Hurricanes are moving on from Charlotte just seem weird, because in my fantasy verse, they stuck.
Yeah. Carolina, Charlotte, Greenville. To have all three of your teams to be in North and South Carolina. When Greenville announced that affiliation last summer, it just made sense. I'm like, this is perfect. This is marketing gold. You've got the ECHL baby jerks, as it were. Yeah. A bunch of jerks.
It definitely seemed like at the time too, especially when I started looking at the maps, I was like, oh yeah, this is, you can't do too much better than that. Let's see some of the other big moves that I made. Newfoundland is the Laval Rocket affiliate now with Montreal. Toronto takes Brampton.
Mm-hmm.
The St. Louis Blues are taking over the Iowa Wild, and the Kansas City Mavericks as their affiliates. Minnesota then gets the Milwaukee Admirals and then the Fort Wayne Comets. And then
Minnesota got Rockford on here is what I'm seeing.
Oh, I think I may have sent you a version in which I've made changes from since. So
it's
yeah.
Minnesota, Milwaukee, and what's your updated version say? Fort Wayne?
It says Minnesota, Milwaukee, Fort Wayne. Yep, that's what I have.
Okay.
Because I decided, because I realized too that was one of the moves that I made when I put Rockford with Milwaukee at first, because it's so close. And then I'm like, yeah, but Rockford has a long history with Chicago. The distance is basically negligible. So let's keep that affiliation, because I think the best that didn't make a whole ton of sense to uproot just for the sake of uprooting to save, a meaningless amount of travel.
Right, but demoting Rockford to an ECHL team, I looked into Rockford's attendance statistics. Boy, that's a tough word for me to say today. But I looked into Rockford's stats and attendance wise, and it's just amazing how it keeps decreasing everything. I'm like, man, they're a prime candidate to be bought. And the AHL franchise and moved out to Henderson. And I was, theoretically thinking like, hey, Rockford could be an ECHL market or even an SPHL market because of the numbers that they bring in. And, even being a former UHL market back in, I want to say the mid to late 2000s, when the UHL existed for a minute there. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you bumping them down to the ECHL makes perfect sense there.
Yep, and again, I actually like that organization a lot. They put out one of their things to help the community, where basically you send them $10, and that buys a ticket for, I think it's you and one of the first responders or like ER docs that have dealt with the COVID crisis right away. And it's like there's something else involved in it too. And I remember posting a tweet about it, saying like, this is what actually helping the community looks like. And it was a very good effort by them. So it is absolutely nothing personal that I put them in the ECHL. So to save me from angry DMs from their fans later, it's only a model.
It's only a model. Right. Exactly. Yep. It's only a spreadsheet. I mean, relax. Yeah. It's yeah. And honestly, like I'd thought about, something like this a long time ago, and especially like with the Idaho Steelheads. They have a long standing affiliation with the Dallas Stars and the Texas Stars. And it's been that way since 2005. I think Texas came around later on. So I'm not quite sure who their AHL team. I'd have to look that up on HockeyDB, but yeah, Idaho, I always thought, I'm like, okay, well, what's the closest NHL team to Idaho? And I believe it was the Calgary Flames. And so obviously that's not really a whole big difference because of the fact that you've got a ton more movement between ECHL and the AHL, and pretty much little, minuscule to none. I mean, it really doesn't matter where your ECHL and your NHL affiliates are. It's more where your ECHL and AHL affiliates are located. And so, Idaho being close to Calgary, I always had that in the back of my mind, just like, well, what would happen if Calgary, had an AHL affiliate nearby and everything. And I think at the time they had their AHL affiliate in Abbotsford. Abbotsford. Thank you. They had their AHL affiliate in Abbotsford. And so I'm like, well, maybe Idaho could connect with them. But man, again, you've got, it's much more than proximity to have Idaho attached to the Dallas and Texas Stars. But yeah, you self-confessed, you're like, man, some of these just aren't going to be close. I mean, it's just not going to work with the existing franchises. And even with you taking liberties of some expansion franchises and demotions and promotions and everything, Calgary is paired with Bakersfield. And so it's like, well, I mean, what are you going to do?
Yeah, it was one of those, like, I could relocate that to somewhere else, but it also just would be like, okay, I already took away Regina because it seemed like the most viable market that was close by. Like, I looked at, was it Montana, like Helena? And it was like, if there was a rink in like an established a little bit more than I could find of like a hockey market and stuff like that, I could see that being a good affiliate there, especially because they'd be like the only real pro sports team in Montana. But I I didn't. It felt like too much of a stretch, and between
Sure.
Bakersfield and Stockton, it seemed like Bakersfield was the more entrenched market. So I went with keeping them but switching them to Calgary. And then I put the Allen Americans with the Texas Stars and the Dallas Stars because geographically I don't
Oh
understand why
yeah.
there's some like that doesn't I don't get that. Whereas Idaho is now with San Jose.
Right. Again, it's like with Idaho, it's like you're going to have that distance between either them and, whoever, them in Bakersfield or them in San Jose. So it's a push at that point with the
Yeah,
Steelheads.
I mean,
But
they were
yeah,
one that I could have gone a couple of different places with, but it's also seemed too, like, especially with the fish theming, the Barracuda, the Sharks, the Steelheads, like that kind of, that
hmm.
growth process seemed to fit pretty well. So that's, I think, ultimately why I ended up with them there.
I like that. I like that. See, you're thinking outside the box too, in regards to not just proximity, but also, variations on a theme.
Yeah.
I can appreciate that for sure. And of course, Allen, it's like, yeah, they're so close to Texas and Dallas. It just would make perfect sense to have them, hypothetically, of course, in an affiliation there. So,
Yep.
let me take a look at some of the other ones here. Yeah, Toledo with Columbus and Cleveland there. That's a good fit. Detroit, Grand Rapids, and Kalamazoo. I'm really surprised how well Vancouver, Utica, and Kalamazoo are working out as as an affiliation tree. Like it's just like
That
it seems to be working for them, even though the distance between Utica and Vancouver is the greatest between an NHL and an AHL affiliate.
Yeah, and even I mean, when Springfield was the Florida Panthers, it still was just like, yeah, but why? Syracuse is the Tampa Bay Lightning, and I'm like, okay, guys, like if that's really what you want to be doing, then sure. Like they're great franchises and everything, but just from a logistics point, I would think you would want to be able to make that emergency call up, like be able to get him across town as opposed to 6 hour flight. That still just seems weird to me that teams aren't more actively pursuing that. And I mean, there's definitely been that trend, but one of the things that I noticed while doing this too
Hmm.
is the very weird overlap between like where some of the bases of like the ECHL and the AHL and the NHL are, and then where they're sub, where it's like, yeah, there are a lot of ECHL teams that are in the South. There's Greenville, Orlando, Atlanta, like South Carolina, all like Jacksonville, all just kind of right there.
Right.
And the nearest AHL team is Charlotte,
Yeah.
and that's it. Like when you pull up the actual like map of where these teams are, it's Charlotte and nothing. There isn't
Yeah.
anything like the next closest is Pennsylvania and Texas. Like it's just this giant nothingness for the AHL and like the southeast where the ECHL has been for a long time. And then you see the NHL map and it's like, oh yeah, there's teams in Nashville, South Carolina, Tampa, Florida, but there is no overlap with the AHL there, and that just seems bizarre. As well as that's why I ended up promoting ECHL
Florida.
franchises to AHL teams. Yeah, promoting
Right. Florida
Florida,
and Jacksonville.
Jacksonville, and then Cincinnati. They became the Nashville Predators AHL team, and that seemed like a really good fit for them.
Yeah, and I know Cincinnati. I've heard rumblings of them. They got an ECHL franchise 6 seasons ago, and they're wanting to bump up eventually to the AHL. Is what I'm hearing from in regards to just management and the old, gosh, the old IHL days when you had the Cincinnati Cyclones and everything. They have the population to support an AHL franchise. Now, if the attendance figures are going to go that way as well, I mean, I would think you'd have to play in a bigger arena than when they're currently at the Farmers Coliseum or however however that goes. I forget the exact name of where they play their home games there, but yeah, Cincinnati getting bumped up to the AHL makes sense. It does because again, you've got a pro sports market there, in regards to the Cincinnati Reds and the Bengals. It's a pro sports city. So to bump it up to the next level and to make it to make it an AHL town, it makes sense to me. I want to break down a little bit the divisions you've got going on here. You stuck pretty well to the 4 division system in the AHL, but I noticed that you broke up the ECHL into 6, either 4 or 5 team divisions.
Yep.
And let's
So
dive into that a little bit. Go ahead.
so my plan for the ECHL changed a lot based on like how I could group teams together and then like come up with a way for the playoff system to work, because I spent way too much time thinking about this.
Fair enough.
But
Fair enough.
basically, I broke up the ECHL into 6 divisions, and the way the playoffs would work would still be East and West, but it would be a double challenge round. So I would
Okay.
have the top 2 teams from each division are automatically in, and then there's just the rest are wild cards to fill out the 8. So the last 2 seeds would just be the best of whatever 2 teams are left points wise in the conference.
I like that.
You seed them 1 through 8, and then you do the SPHL's idea of the challenge round, which was the best thing to happen in pro hockey in so long. It was so much fun and such a clever idea to generate intrigue into some of these matchups. And that's why I would bring it to this format of, especially too, it doesn't force teams into bad travel scenarios. So like if
Right.
Kansas City is the top seed in the West and they get auto matched up with Rockford, like that travel sucks. The same thing with putting Rapid City in there and having them go to Indy. Like that travel's awful. Like that's probably not sustainable for an ECHL level budget. So that's why double challenge round. So basically, you would have your number 1 seeded team in the conference. They get open pick. They get to pick whatever team they want to play. And that means they could choose for travel reasons, strategy reasons, player, reasons, anything like that. But then the travel is their choice. They chose to make, that trek across country should need be. And then basically once that first round is over, you reseed challenge round part 2. That's why I call it a double challenge round. So your top seeded in the second round gets to pick which of the 3 teams that it wants to play. And the other 2 just kind of, sort themselves out. But that's why I think, that would make the most fun playoff system in hockey of 2 challenge rounds, like that level of intrigue, the build up, the marketing, the trash talk that you could build from those, I think would be super interesting, as well as helping to like teams can't complain that they picked the opponent that was across the country because that's they made that choice.
Right. Right.
And it also, like I said, I think would generate a lot of good stories for them. And then the, conference finals and the finals are pretty much set. It doesn't matter if there's a challenge round; you only have 1 team to pick. So that's how I would break it up. And I tried my best to try and keep the like divisions where like rivalries that are clearly established. Fort Wayne and Indy and stuff like that. I tried to keep them together as best I could, but some moves had to get made just to make everything fit. But I think I did a pretty good job with it. I kept most of the South together. Wheeling was, I think, the one that I moved. They're not in the division with Kalamazoo, Toledo, Fort Wayne, Indy, or Rockford. They're in with Reading, Utica, Binghamton, and Brampton. And even still, like geographically, that fits for them.
Yeah, they're kind of on the cusp, and that's why when you had Maine and Newfoundland enter into the ECHL North Division a couple seasons ago, Wheeling just bumped over to the Midwest Division, and that, or the Central Division rather. I'm looking at Midwest here on your on your spreadsheet, and I was looking at one thing and thinking another. And that totally makes sense, because you could have Wheeling just kind of as that in between West Virginia market between the Central Division, playing guys like Toledo and Indy and Fort Wayne, or you could bump them back over to where you have them playing in this hypothetical ECHL Metro Division with Reading, with Utica, Binghamton, and Brampton, like you said. And yeah, you did a good job sticking with them. I like how you put Reno in with Idaho and Utah and Rapid City. You definitely solidifying that Western Conference, or that Western Division. ECHL Midwest might as well be called the former CHL division, because you got all former CHL Central Hockey League teams in Kansas City, Wichita, Tulsa, and Allen. So you've preserved all those rivalries. Well done, good sir. The ECHL Central Division, you just squeezed Rockford right in with Indy, Fort Wayne, Toledo, Kalamazoo. Yeah, they just fit in like a glove with all those rivalries. ECHL North, pretty much the same. Newfoundland, Maine, Adirondack, Worcester. And then the South, all the same. Like 5 current South Division teams make up your hypothetical: Greenville, Orlando, Atlanta, South Carolina, and Norfolk. So
Yep.
well done. And I love the double challenge round idea because it's so fascinating that the SPHL adopted that, and it's ultimately another reward for being like for earning those points and getting that higher seed in the playoffs. It's like, okay, now you get to pick who you want to be, and that's fascinating to me that the SPHL had done that. But also, when I interviewed former Idaho Steelheads and South Carolina Stingrays player Steve McParland, who played in Italy this past season, he explained to me how the Alps Hockey League, which is comprised of 3 different countries, you've got Italy, Austria, and Slovenia, that has 17 teams across the league. And once the regular season is over, you've got the top 6 teams in each league. And then you've got what's called, there's a Masters round between each of those 6 teams, and they play, and then they get reseeded within those top 6 teams, which is kind of funny to me. So it's like a premiere, like a primer of the playoffs where you get reseeded and everything like that. And then he explained to me that the bottom teams in each conference also would play, and then those top 2 would get wild card berths, essentially wild card berths. Yeah. So the ones that were on the outside looking in, they would play. And then after that round, the top 2 would be able to get in and sneak in as those 7 and 8 seeds in each conference. Or maybe it's top 4, top 6. I can't quite remember the numbers off the top of my head, but he explained it to me. After all of that, you finally have your postseason. Then the top 3 seeds in each conference get to pick their opponent, and the 4 and 5 seed are stuck with each other.
Really?
So you have a challenge round, but it's just many more layers added to it.
Yeah.
And so it's like the Alps Hockey League, I don't know, they probably, I mean, it sounds a lot like European football or soccer. It sounds, you've got obviously promotion and relegation and everything, but yeah, it just sounds a lot like it's just these little niches and everything. It makes it a lot more exciting. And so obviously I didn't see that on the spreadsheet when you sent it to me, but the fact that you reorganized it and kind of did a double challenge round thing it's fascinating to me. And I think that would definitely add another level of intrigue for sure.
Yeah, especially because like there would be such good. I mean, like I said, ECHL Twitter is the best part of hockey Twitter because there is that level of banter that you just don't find in other places. Like I would love to see a double challenge round and see some of the banter between them on social media.
Oh.
It would be it would be amazing.
Yeah, I can just see like like an Idaho choosing to go with Utah instead of against like an Allen or a Wichita, and just Allen or Wichita on social media be like, "What, you scared, bro? What? Why aren't you picking us, bro?" Oh, it'd be phenomenal. Yeah, the banter would be.
It would be great.
It would be great, man. Real quick, we'll break down the AHL divisions. Not much of a change here. Like you said, you had some promotions and some relocations and everything. AHL West pretty much stays intact. You've got San Diego, Bakersfield, the expansion Palm Springs franchise coming in, Ontario, Abbotsford getting a franchise again, San Jose, Tucson, and of course the relocated Henderson franchise. AHL Midwest, you've got Regina coming in, Manitoba, Iowa, Colorado moves over from the Pacific Division, which is probably what's going to happen this next season anyway. Texas, Milwaukee, Chicago, Grand Rapids stay put there in the Midwest. AHL North, Toronto, Rochester, Syracuse, Laval, Hartford, Providence, Springfield, and Cleveland. Those all seem geographically totally making sense. And then the AHL East, and this is where you include a lot of the southern teams I've noticed. Cincinnati comes in, Florida, and Jacksonville. Those 3 that got promotions are placed in the AHL East, along with Charlotte, Lehigh Valley, Hershey, Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, I always mess that up, and then Bridgeport. So pretty well, they wedged them pretty well in geographically. You wedged them in there pretty well geographically is what I meant to say.
Yep, and there were a couple of points where it's like, well, do we put Cleveland in the east or do we put Bridgeport in the north or something like that? Because where it was like the way I kind of looked at just where the grouping was on the map, and I'm like, well, also I feel it weird calling Cleveland an eastern AHL division city just because it's not. But
fair, that's fair.
It always bugs me that the Dallas Cowboys are in the was it NFC East? Like, I understand why, but don't use geographical names then. Name it, the Legends division or name it after something. Like, just...
Right.
But that's a different topic. But it's... I felt like this grouping of it, especially giving Charlotte some, places where it could go play nearby or do a weekend swing through the South, playing, a Friday at Jacksonville, a Saturday at Florida, and then maybe swinging through Wednesday in Cincinnati before coming home, instead of, Charlotte having to do these trips where it's like, oh yeah, you're going to drive 6 hours because there's nothing else. That was something I was hoping to kind of regroup in there.
Right. Yeah, it's a fascinating chart here, fascinating spreadsheet, and like I said, we'll definitely find a way. If I got to screenshot this thing and put it in the outline of the In the Corners page, I will do that. But it's definitely going to be included. It's definitely a fascinating. I finally got the colors to work. Like, you color coded this, and yeah. I talked about that with Sean, how the colors in relocation and expansion, he color coded a lot of it, and it didn't go through. And so I just needed to download it and open it in Microsoft Excel as opposed to Google Sheets. So I think that was my problem. So that was the issue there, but we got it taken care of.
I'll make sure I send you the updated one too. Yeah, because I realized I made a couple of tweaks because I was like, oh no, we gotta make this one little. Yeah, I guess I forgot to send you the final last dot version 3 dot today. So
no worries, man. No, I hadn't realized you made some revisions to it. So we will definitely, please send that over. We'll get it posted to the website. And we'll get it all taken care of. So once again, Sean O'Brien, analytics guru, a friend of the Sin Bin for a long time now. Sean, thanks for coming on In the Corners, and thanks for talking about analytics and your hypothetical division realignment, geographical, for the NHL, AHL, and ECHL.
Hey, happy to come on. If your listeners are interested in some of the work that I do, they can always follow me on Twitter at Sean O'Brien81. I'm also on Instagram, where I post different content from my Twitter. That's at Sean O'Brien _81. If you want to check out my Tableau page, the easiest link is probably the bit.ly link. It's bit.ly/SO81-Tableau, TABLEAU. Links to everything are also found on all my social media. But if you guys are interested in stuff like that, that's where you can check out my work.
And we will definitely be including that on our In the Corners page under episode 84 that we have just recorded. So I'll get all those links on there so that you can go follow Sean. He does amazing work. Like I said, I dived into it in regards to the Colorado Eagles. Little bit interesting season year in review. And we'll see how the season shakes out. I meant to mention this earlier, but the league is having a conference call on May 8th. That is a Friday, I believe, and rumor has it that they are going to officially kibosh the 2019-20 season. And I know the NHL is really ramping up and trying to get their season salvaged, but I think the AHL is not going to follow suit from what I've heard. So, yeah. Anyway, stay tuned. We will we'll be doing a one episode per month here in the off-season setup of In the Corners. Be sure to follow the Sin Bin on Twitter at Sin Bin News. Follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/thesinbin.net. And don't forget to also follow Sin Bin Photos on Instagram. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Sin Bin Eagles. I also have an Instagram page of random hockey photos at CC Hawk. Not going to do too much selfless promotion here. For Sean O'Brien, I have been CC Hawkley. Thanks for coming In the Corners. Keep your stick on the ice.
Thanks for listening to the In the Corners podcast. Stay caught up with the latest minor league hockey news by downloading the Sinbin app for Android and Apple devices.
All sports fans have experienced this, right? Something amazing happens on the ice and you think, man, I wish I'd have been filming. Now with the Sporfy app, you can replace that thought with a click. With just one click of a button, Sporfy captures the past 15 seconds of action so you can instantly replay and share your favorite moments all without having to film. And it's easy too. All you have to do is download the app on iOS or Android devices and experience an all-new way of filming sports highlights.